Brandon, can you talk a little bit about when you start to work with farm and ranch families? What's the first thing that they need to do?
One of the first things that our farm and ranch families need to do is make sure that the patriarch and matriarch are on the same page. Because if mom and dad, that patriarch and matriarch, are not on the same page, the odds that the succession plan, transition plan, continuity plan, whatever you want to call it, gets off on the right foot or is successful is very slim. Because mom and dad, as many of us in this industry have stated, it's the gold rule. It's you as the gold gets to make the rules. So if mom and dad have the gold and they can't come to a consensus, there's a very difficult time that this plan is going to be successful.
So as we start to think about farm estate and transition planning, who all should we have on that team?
So the team is always going to be people that the family trust. Who are your trusted advisors? Is it your banker? Is it your accountant? Is it your attorney? Is it somebody else that has a good understanding of who your family is, what your family is, and how your operation works? And they should be experts in their arena. So if you don't truly believe that they're experts in your arena, that's when you go out and you talk to people that you trust to find people to bring that seat at the table that are experts in their arena. And a lot of times we can find out that if they're not, we'll bring that right person to the table. Whether it's an attorney, whether it's a CPA, whether it's somebody like myself, a financial advisor. But you need multiple people on your team because all those professionals provided excellent checks and balances to making sure what everybody's recommendations are to you as your family is in your best interest and actually is applicable to your situation.
How do you feel about having meetings with those advisors together?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if we go back, the biggest aspect to having a successful continuity or transition plan is communication. So even though that first initial meeting may be with mom and dad to identify what the goals and objectives are, that second meeting is probably with family members, especially active family members and inactive family members. But then you're going to have multiple meetings after that. Okay, so after we get clarity on what the goals and objectives are, and after we find out what other direct family members' interests are or involvement is, or what their emotional components are, then it's bringing in the attorney, the CPA, the other trusted advisors into those meetings and saying, how do we accomplish this family's goals and objectives? And how do we make sure that the decisions that are being made as a family are in that operation's best interest?
How do we create an opportunity for good communication among family members?
You know, that's the best question that most family members have a hard time starting. How do I start the conversation? How do I bring this up to mom and dad? Or mom and dad, how do I bring this up to my kids? And one of the biggest things that I can say is start sharing the history of the operation. Because a lot of us have a really hard time talking about transition, and that transition means change. But it's really easy to talk about the history of that family farm or ranch. When was it homesteaded? How did it get started? What sacrifices did the family have to make to get it to where it is today? And if we could do something over, what would you do over? And just helping your kids understand the why and how you got there and what sacrifices you had to make and what you could do over stimulates a ton of conversation on what you would do differently and what you want this to look like in the next 10, 20, 30 years.
How do you feel about non-farm children in farm meetings and in-laws in farm meetings?
I think there should absolutely be a meeting to where non-farm children and in-laws should participate. Because at the end of the day, if they don't have a voice, you're setting up potential arguments. You're setting the succession plan up for failure because you didn't get everybody's input. Now, just because they have a voice at that meeting doesn't mean they get input, but at least you're giving them the opportunity to be heard and you're taking it into consideration. And there's many times where they have a really good idea and there may be something brought up or an insight or a procedure that you haven't thought of. So I love the idea within a certain framework of having non-active kids and spouses in at least one portion of the family meeting.
At what point in an operation should we start talking about farm estate and transition planning?
You know, that's the one answer to where the sooner the better. I really haven't seen a negative situation to where having that conversation sooner than later has hurt anyone. Where it does hurt is when it's too late. When life happens and a situation takes place to where you can't change the outcome.